Into Chaos by George Dew, published by Dark City Games. This is an adventure that is structured like the good old MicroQuest games from the late 70s, early 1980s. Those games, just like this game, could be played solo, could be played cooperatively, have pretty much the feel and the flavor of a role-playing game that can be played without a dungeon master. You have a booklet of encounters, which is paragraph-based, and that you navigate pretty much like a choose-your-own-adventure book or a fighting fantasy book. You start reading, the text will give you different options of things that you can do, telling you if you want to do this, go to that paragraph. If you want to do that other thing, go to that other paragraph. And the paragraph will continue the story by telling you what happens as a result of the actions that you attempted. So you move along this textual tree of branching options, doing different things and experiencing the adventure. Pretty much the text, the booklet, and the text in the booklet takes on the role of the dungeon master. It tells you what a dungeon master will tell you by describing the environment, by telling you about the type of people, monsters, creatures that you encounter. Different from Dungeon Master, of course, and more like a game book. In essence, this is a game book. The text gives you explicit options about what to do, whereas part of the fun of role-playing game is precisely that. There is not an explicitly determined and described menu of options. You can attempt potentially anything, and you have to figure out what is wise to attempt and what is not. So there is that restriction. The experience of playing this type of text-based adventure is less exciting in that sense than playing a full role-playing game. On the other hand, there are so many practical advantages. You do not need a master. You can play when no one is around. You can bring with you on vacation. So there's a trade-off there. Less flexibility than a role-playing game, but still a role-playing game experience with a strong narrative feel that you can have within the parameters of a board game, which is, again, discrete rules, clear-cut rules and procedures. You do not have much discretion. You cannot invent new rules. You cannot invent new procedures on the fly. It's a more regimented experience, but still with a lot of flavor and narrative ideas. Also, it's an interaction between a board game and a text-based adventure, because more than in choose-your-own-adventure books, which are purely narrative, there are no game procedures, even more than the fighting fantasy game books, in which you do have game procedures, you roll dice to fight combat, etc., etc., but the action feels pretty abstract. It's about numerical adjustments, doesn't have a tactical feel, doesn't have a spatial element. In games in the older MicroQuest system and in Dark City Games, you do have a spatial element, because from time to time you're instructed to move the action from the text that is verbally describing what happens to a board. The game comes with a board which is folded in four, and I'm not showing you the entire thing because I don't want to give any spoilers about the environments that you may encounter. And then the text will tell you, in this area you encounter this and that enemy. Then place the pieces representing your heroes in this and that area, the enemies in this and that other area. And the game also comes with some counters. I'm not showing them to you. I want to show you that are there, that I'm not lying. I'm not giving you too much of a sense of what you find in there. Counters representing characters that you may encounter, characters representing, well, your own characters, your own avatar in the game. So you have a counter that represents your hero, and then characters representing monsters and encounters. So from time to time, the action becomes a pure board game based action. You set up what is basically a tactical war game. You set up the pieces representing your heroes, the pieces representing the enemies. You move and make decisions for your heroes. There is a simple system to represent what the enemies do, which in essence is they try to kill you, they maneuver to get in a position to attack you, and then you roll dice for them to see how they attack you. So it's a really nice interaction between textual elements, paragraph-based elements, and the board games. It was a very strong narrative experience that tells a story and that combines these elements together. Now, This is the general idea that you find behind all old MicroQuest games and all games by Dark City Games. They have a nice catalog and they have science fiction adventures, a lot of fantasy adventures, a single adventure set in the old American West. I wish there were more in that setting. That's a fun setting. I don't think it has been explored enough. Into Chaos is their last offer. Again, it follows all of the guidelines, parameters of previous games. You have a booklet, you have a board, you have counters, you can play solo, you can play cooperatively, you start reading, you follow the adventure, you enjoy the story, from time to time you fight a battle and then you go back to the story, etc, etc, etc. So, and you may have seen other videos by me in the past because I played a lot of the games. I like games that tell stories, and well, rarely do you find games that tell stories in such a clear and vivid fashion as games that combine a text, a system of textual paragraphs with an actual board. Into Chaos is a sci-fi adventure, sorta. It's technically sci-fi, I guess, but somehow the feel that I got was almost more fantasy than sci-fi. The setting, the idea is that there was this space colony on a distant moon or planet called Eden Colony. It was destroyed during a war by atomic weapons, and so it took a long time for the planet to go back to be even maybe inhabitable. And now, so after several decades, you, the solitaire player, and or other members of your party, if you're playing with several friends, are traveling to Eden Colony to map what's there, to see if it's inhabitable again, to see if a colony can be restarted, to see if there are resources that may justify investment, and so on and so forth. So basically you will land on this distant planet, and then you will map the area around the place where you are. Your mission is to place 4 beacons, one north, one east to west, and one south of where you land, and then go back to your starship and leave the place. So that is your mission. There will be traveling around the map. There will be encounters as you progress and you go from paragraph to paragraph. You'll probably want to create what is both a physical and a textual map. You know, if I'm in the center and I'm told if you go north, go to paragraph 18. If you go left, if you go east, 59. If you go west, 9. If you go south, 114. So simply write those numbers, and as you progress in the exploration, this way you know where you need to go back, what are the areas that you haven't explored, etc, etc, etc. It's fun stuff. It's fun stuff. If you've seen my videos in the past, you know that I like the system in general, you know that I like games that tell stories, and I'll tell you that this is a good implementation of the system. Not an excellent one, not one that I enjoyed, say, more than average. And this, although I say it's per se perfectly fine and good adventure, there are just so many other options, including in the catalog of Dark City games, that are better than, I would almost say, in 2017, a good adventure in the system is maybe not good enough when some of the old adventures are so good, and some of the adventures produced by Dark City Games itself are so good. What are the pluses and minuses here? The plus is the variety of the encounters. You're gonna, and no spoilers, you're gonna encounter a lot of monsters, a situation with different fights, etc, etc, etc. The minus is that they feel a little bit disconnected. They don't feel like they're much more than the sum of the parts. In this sense, there is a little bit of a retro feel to it, because of course adventures, role-playing adventures in the 70s and still the early 80s, and sometimes in fighting fantasy books, they felt a little disjointed, they felt a little disconnected, they felt like a sum of encounters and not more than the sum of those encounters. They felt like a fun fair of things, one fight after the other, one strange, unusual thing happening after the other, without necessarily an overarching story, without a narrative, without an arc. And that was fun enough and good enough in 1977, By 2017, well, I guess we have, well, at least we, or at least I, have become a little more demanding. I like stories that have a lot of fun episodes, fights, combat, surprises, challenging places, mysterious, uncanny situations, etc., etc., etc. But I like that the extra layer there. I would like things to get together and to tell me more of a story, to have a twist at some point, to give me a little more of character development, a little bit of depth. The scenario, I would like the setting to feel like, again, it has a certain three-dimensional element rather than to feel like a quilt of fun, perfectly fun and good encounters, but no more than that. And that to me is one of the limitations of Into Chaos, this adventure specifically. It's fun to play, but it's a type of fun that I've had so many other times in other similar adventures. And by now, when I'm reading what is basic interactive fiction or narrative-based board gaming, they're just options that give me more of a sense of a story, character development, more of an immersive feel. There's nothing wrong, but unfortunately also nothing new in going in a place, fighting a monster, going to another place, the place is described as different, now it's not that place, it's another place, it's not that monster, it's another monster, I fight this monster. I go to another place, I open that box and I find that item, and in the next place I'll find a different box with a different item. This idea of not so much of a story but an environment that is basically a series of variations on the theme, different monsters, different treasures, different things. Again, nothing wrong with it, but I've done it, I've seen it, I've played it, I've enjoyed it, and because of the law of diminishing ends, I guess, the more I enjoy something that is very similar, the less pleasure I'm gonna get out of it, the less fun it's going to be. So if you've never played a game of this sort, if you've never played a MicroQuest game, a Dark City game, or haven't played many, it's like, oh, that was fun, look at that, I fought all those monsters, I defeated all those enemies, who knew that in that place there was that surprise to be had? But you have seen it all. It doesn't have the certain je ne sais quoi, it doesn't have that extra gear that at this point I believe you need to have an interesting story, an interesting game in a system that has been so well tested and already has so many strong and good titles to its credit. When you add a new thing to a solid system, again, you need to find new ways of making it interesting. Otherwise, the game feels a little bit like a bit of an empty exercise, or just not a super inspired exercise. Another element, I don't know if this could be a spoiler. If you feel it's going to be a spoiler, jump ahead of 2 minutes. I'm going to talk about the configuration of the place, of the overall map, which of course also will tell you something about the configuration of the textual tree. Jump ahead a minute or two if you're afraid. If you don't want to know anything about this, I'll still be pretty vague. What I can say about the configurations of the place is that I didn't like it very much because it was too regular, it was too predictable. Once I started mapping the place, I pretty much figured out the overall organization. It didn't have that breadth, that inventiveness, the way of connecting a passage to another, an area to another, in ways that are super surprising. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I overlook that thing? Oh, there was that. I should have used lateral thinking here to realize that to go from place A to place B, you need to go through place D and connect that thing. It wasn't that fun element that you have when you're solving a maze, or when you're when you're trying to navigate an interesting space. The map, when you start, it won't take you long. Especially if you play games of this time, after you visit like 3 locations and you go, north ones, west ones, and you move around 4 or 5 locations, oh, okay, you get exactly the sense of how the map is going to be. You know exactly the configuration of every location, even of course if you haven't actually seen the majority of those. The problem is that once you figure out the general configuration of the place, then it becomes very easy to go exactly where you need to go, and you figure it out again way before your character had any right to know it. You, the player, are gonna figure out exactly where you need to go, where the optimal places to plant the beacons are, and so also the optimal path, the shortest path to complete the mission is. If this is very exoteric and you're like, Micro's just making stuff up, how can you figure it out after a couple of locations where you need to go? Send me a private message on Board Game Geek. I'll answer as soon as I can. I'll tell you exactly how this is done, so you know I'm not making it up. I wish I was, because that would mean that I am maybe a mean person, but it would also mean that the game is more exciting and intriguing to play than it is. Unfortunately, to me, well, what I like about games that have to do with exploration, of course, is to explore surprising places with a lot of traps, cognitive traps, not necessarily a pit that opens under your feet, but places that are misleading. I think things are going to be in one place and they turn out to be in another. I have to wander around a little bit. I have to fight against my biases and preconceptions to be able to figure out where I need to go. That I was able to figure out where all the relevant pieces of the puzzle were going to be so early on in the adventure turned out to be a big letdown, unfortunately, for me. Also something I wanted to say when I mentioned about the sci-fi, about the genre. It's allegedly sci-fi, but in essence it did feel more like fantasy. Not just because of the low technology element. You know, you may have a Mad Max type of movie in which you do not have teleporters, you do not have Death Stars or hyperdrives, but you still have a sense that it is a low technology sci-fi. If nothing else, because it was the technology possibly that brought the apocalypse, and you're in this post-apocalyptic sense world. Technically it's post-apocalyptic because I'm going to Eden Colony after it was devastated by nuclear explosions. And then I'm walking into this forest that feels pretty much like a fantasy forest or a generic forest from you know, 16th century, 17th century Europe. I'm going to an old city which is supposed to be in ruins and is standing much better than I thought. It just seems like it's a ghost town from the American West. I'm going to other places which I'm not telling you, but again, I'm just getting the sense that I'm going to in what is in most cases what I could find in a fantasy story. I'm fighting against monsters, no spoilers, but let's say that they feel just like animals that I find in a fantasy story. Sometimes modified animals, but again, not teleporting giant metal ants that can read the mind and download their consciousness into my body and take control of me. More like bigger animals that they should be, or animals with this or that minor thing. So it felt the sci-fi element just wasn't there. And on the other hand, even the fantasy element, since there was no magic, no spells, the fantasy element wasn't there all that much either. I would say it almost felt like sci-fi that is not very sci-fi, since it doesn't feel realistic either, turns out to be sort of like low fantasy. To me, it almost felt like a low fantasy, a low magic fantasy, with the fact that at the beginning and at the end you are traveling on a starship and that you are placing beacons or trying to place beacons on the map as opposed to place a magic stone. But other than that, it felt a fairly generic setting. No one that I will remember, oh my gosh, traveling to Eden Colony, that was crazy, such a strong personality, such a strong place. So the setting felt a little bland. Just like, unfortunately, the plot, the textual next also felt bland. Overall, it's not a bad adventure. It is just that I played many more adventures in the Dark City system or in the MicroQuest system and published by Dark City Games. Many more adventures with settings that have more personality, with maps that are more interesting to explore, and with narrative connections that make the story more than the sum of its parts. And all these things were missing here. It feels too textbooks, too by the book. Go to a place, fight, move to the next place. It's a quilt of narrative situations, which I think could be good if you're introducing somebody to the system, but also there are other games in the system that are not more cognitively complicated. They don't have more rules than this one. and are more fun. So I don't know, if you're an addict to Dark City games and you played all that they have and you need one more, then Into Chaos, I guess, is better than getting Withdrawal. But other than that, this is definitely not the first, the second, or the 10th, or the 15th title in the Dark City offer that I would go for. It feels fairly average, fairly bland, which again is much better than not to play a Dark City game at all, but much less excited than to play so many other good games in the system. And then also, it's 2017, just we have so many other great paragraph-based games, or in any case, narrative-oriented games out there that just another thing that would have been revolution in 1977, but feels like a tired re-implementation of the formula. Well, this in 2017 is just not good enough. It's not good enough. I would not recommend this one. If you like this kind of game and you have any option of getting other games by Dark City Games, if for whatever reason this is all you can play, for whatever weird reason I can't even fathom, well, it's better than not to play your quasi role-playing game adventure. It is still a good adventure, but not a particularly attractive one with all the offer that we have out there these days.